So, now we're back. We talked about the need for mediation in museums and how problematic it is in that the way that people are taught on how to appreciate museums and museum artworks is actually a sort of a tool of social reproduction and a tool of social distinction and therefore of inequality. But in the 50s and 70s and 60s with John Dewey, in the 80s with Jacques Rancière, taking the example of someone from the 19th century, new ideas about education have developed. The question now is how are these being implemented today in museums? And so the first question is the format itself. The first format that we can think of is something that you probably all are familiar with. It's a little piece of paper that it sits next to an artwork. And that's the first thing that is didactic, that is explains to you what you should be thinking of when you look at this piece. You see a particular portrait and you read the paper, and now you know what the portrait is about. And implicitly it's about nothing else. It doesn't, or very rarely does that piece of paper actually ask a question. I've never seen one. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those wall labels. The second part is going to be the audio tour. The audio tour again doesn't care who you are, right? It kind of cares which language you select to some extent, but whether you are an art student, whether you're retired, whether you just arrived in the country, whether you've been living there for 50 years, doesn't make a difference to what content is being delivered, to what lecture is being delivered in the auditorium. The third one is going to be the group tour, with an actual docent. So the person that is there to answer any of your questions that you might have about a particular work, and then walks you through the galleries at, again, a particular pace, with a particular speech and a particular amount of time for questions and answers. Some of those tours have started not so much as conversations or as discussions, but rather as practices of unidirectional knowledge delivery. The word for docent or the word for tour guide in French is actually the equivalent of conference giver. So you're giving a conference on the go about the knowledge that you've accumulated. And then there are workshops and collaborations. Workshops are those sort of family programs that happen on particular days, and collaborations are partnerships with separate organizations, where there are schools, agencies, artistic collectives, as we'll see. But in terms of workshops, there are already things that you can think about is when do those workshops actually happen. There was a workshop at MoMA in New York a couple of years ago where it would have been sort of the ideal constructivist, do-it-yourself, learn-by-doing situation in which they gave participants all of their old catalogs and then a piece of paper and then some glue, and then people made their own catalogs by cutting away 30 years of catalogs that MoMA had, which would have been great, which would have been exactly what Malraux would have imagined with his imaginary museum that we talked about last week. The only issue is that this workshop happened on a Tuesday afternoon. And who has the luxury to be in Midtown on a Tuesday afternoon? People who live in Midtown and who don't particularly need a job. And so it was a lot of, or people who don't have class. Turns out I didn't have class. So I went, and then I saw a lot of people who sort of reproduced this idea of these are the kind of people who go to MoMA for fun. And these are not, museums are not reaching out to someone else or to other communities, but they're sort of reiterating the same discourse and even perhaps reinforcing certain social classes in their beliefs that going to the museum is making them more cultured for the broader good, rather than thinking through the fact that the audience is not very diverse. So that's a very practical issue that you should also be aware of, is that even with all your intentions, there might be one little detail as to when does that thing actually happen that makes a huge difference in the result of the workshop or the event that you want to give. On the other side of this is the Sunday workshop, right? And the Sunday workshop, who can go on Sundays? The people who work 6 days a week, right? And these are going to be very different people from those who live in Midtown, usually. And so the Sunday visitor, a workshop for the Sunday visitor, a workshop for the Tuesday afternoon visitor should take into account the different nature of those visitors, right? In terms of collaboration, the museums are expanding their horizons in order to develop what the buzzword is today, the interdisciplinary approach. It's not just about museum, but it's museum plus music. It's museum plus performing arts. It's museum plus political studies. It's museum plus humanities or literature, and so on and so forth. And those collaborations often allow sort of a sidestep in the knowledge production and enrich the perspective. It's no longer just the curator who says this is what it is, but the curator and someone else who come up with a joint project. And when you start having 2 people, that implies that you can enlarge the circle more and more, having 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, and integrate more and more of an audience into your discourse. And so this is what museums have started to do in physical spaces. This is the example of a collective in Mexico called TLC, I guess, with I forgot what the name of the museum is. It's the link is in the class notes, in which they organized workshops for museum visitors, and particularly kids. And the material that they used is what you usually have to create the line at the ticket booth, or any line anywhere really. And so what they offered is to learn something about starting from that object, learn something about mazes, about bureaucracy, about waiting, about respecting rules, about cheating the line, not cheating the line, staying in line. What is a line? Was there always the concept of the line in human civilization or in the human species? When did that happen? Can we imagine a future without a line? Does it make sense to queue like this? What is it supposed to represent? At what point does this stop being functional and start becoming something artistic? And you'll notice that this is the kind of workshop where no answers are given, but questions, right? And this is what Dewey, the constructivist theorist that we talked about in the previous video, says is that we should be ready to have more and more questions. When you have an answer to a question, it's not really an answer, it's just a call for another deeper question, another investigation, another inquiry. And these kind of workshops are those that provide more inquiries. This example here is from it might be a little dark on the video, but you can see it in the class notes in the description. It's from the Humboldt-Bahnhof in Berlin, which collaborated with a architectural agency called Raumlabor, in which they reproduced little postcards of the works of the exhibition, and had a couple of instructions for the visitors to follow, or to guide them in a direction, in which you would pick one postcard from each of the columns, and then you create something out of it, because all the postcards on the left are always sort of the left side of the image, the middle is always going to be the body of the image, and then on the right side is going to be the tail. So it's always going to create something in the end. You're going to have something unique and something that you have made by choosing in the different rows. And then on the other side is a word, and then you have 3 words, and then there's a panel a little bit behind where you go and you write down those words. And so that allows you to sort of think differently about the artworks that you've just seen. Maybe there's one you don't care about. Maybe there's one you really deeply care about, that you think is really beautiful, and you see this word that's associated with it, and by writing it, you become the judge as to whether or not you actually want to inscribe this or to write this down on a particular board. And there's no one to tell you you should write this, you should not write this, right? If you want to leave a message, you can leave a message. If you want to leave your phone number, you leave your phone number. If you want to draw sunshine, you can draw sunshine. You are free to do what you want, and the assumption is that whatever the person is going to do, if you give them the possibility to do it, there's no reason why we should assume that they're going to do something uneducated or bad or stupid or so on and so forth. It is the benefit of the doubt for any person that comes and visits this particular exhibition. So that's for two examples about physical spaces. The question now is how well does that translate digitally? How well does it translate with digital media? And there are two things that I can think of, which one of them was mentioned in the Ignorant Art Museum reading. There is, even though digital media, as we've seen like week 2, is something that's interactive, even though people expect to contribute, it is still not the case in museum applications. The app for the Met, for the Tate, for the Rijksmuseum are still very much static content. It is content that is given to you, and then you can sort of reorganize it, and that has a constructivist sort of feel to it, but it's still not something in which you create and then you share again. There are those two experimental projects which are not sort of deployed long-term. One of them was in the museum, in the reading, was having comments or like allowing visitors to leave comments about a particular work, and that's an interesting question. Do you think that if you let people say whatever they want, are you going to end up with something terrible, or are you going to end up with something great? And if you end up with both, is the price of having to handle something terrible worth to pay when you want to have something great? If the amount of like teenager profanity that people might write as a comment, is that worth providing an outlet for someone who can finally say how they feel about a particular painting, and then having someone else realize that there was a comment that was written that relates to them and makes them feel part of a community, right? Maybe they came to the museum alone and they realized they're not alone. And that would be a fulfillment of the museum's mission. So the commenting is one part of it. The other part is if there are applications that allow you to create your own pathway, to create your own journey, to what extent could your own pathway be on par with the official pathway or the official itinerary that is suggested to you by the museum application? And the Humboldt Forum actually worked on a prototype of this called the Red Thread, in which they would use augmented reality to visit the gallery. And you could follow different threads from different people. You could follow the one from the curator, which suggested to you if you want to learn about Oceania, you go through the Oceania department. Perhaps there's the mayor of Berlin who came and visited once, and you can follow his steps and see what he was interested in. But you could also just have your own itinerary and then record that and then upload it and have it for free, and have Pierre's itinerary is uploaded on the website, and then if someone else just like looks at my profile, is mildly interested into where I've been, then they should also be able to consult it. And this sort of contribution is again assuming that anyone who's contributing has something worthwhile to say, and that is in my particular opinion, that's an obstacle that is still hard for a lot of people to overcome. To assume that to start with the working assumption that everyone is smart. So these are the two components: the commenting and the sharing of collections or pathways. These are how one could sort of modify or mute the overarching curatorial voice that was there since the beginning of modern museums. And so the last part is, how does augmented reality contribute to that, right? A lot of augmented reality that we've seen in those projects in which more information shows up, those projects in which like different overlays, X-rays, or infrared scans of particular paintings, of reconstructed models appear. These are still very didactic. They're presenting you with information, and they're implicitly saying this information is relevant. One question that I have for you, and that I don't particularly have the answer right now, is how would an ignorant augmented reality look like? If ignorant education, if the ignorant schoolmaster is the one who only provides the disciplinary framework, or the thought, the rigorousness of thought, in order for one to develop their own will to learn, how does that look like in augmented reality? Is augmented reality a medium that could allow someone to develop their own knowledge and to develop their ability to learn? Would it be having, as we mentioned, this pathway across the museum, and then justifying what were the choices that were made? Would it be recreating a particular museum and say like a completely empty room, as was the example, or a version of the example in the second reading, in which they created their own exhibition? Anyone could potentially have a room full of virtual objects and swipe through different exhibitions made by different visitors, and therefore both create themselves but also act as the intellectual assessment of someone else. And if someone is assumed to be smart enough to learn anything, they should also assume to be smart enough to control the intellectual work or the knowledge work of someone else. That there shouldn't be anyone who says that they can't have an opinion because they're not good enough, or they're not well versed enough. There are some things that everybody knows something, everybody is good at something. How do you take those skills and this discipline of thought that you put into being good at that one thing into something else, into the space of the museum? If someone tells you, this is my exhibition, I really like it, how do you judge that to make sure that you understand why they really like it, and they understand why they say that they really like it? Does that go through a virtual exhibition? Could that go through a sort of collaborative augmented reality where we can all see the same object and discuss around it? Does that go through sharing any sort of content that was created to anyone else? And recreate a sort of Wikipedia or Stack Overflow in the museum space. So I'll leave you with these questions, and I'll leave you with this conclusion that in the end, museums have been a location of social reproduction and the reproduction of social separations. But the way that we've been thinking about education from this very didactic, I say and you listen, and if you listen enough, you will know, this didactic approach has changed over time, has changed since the second half of last century, and museums have adapted to this sort of constructivist approach, just learning by doing, and even this framework approach of just providing nothing else, no content, just verifying that someone is doing and thinking the best that they can, assuming that they will do the best they can, they will think the best they can. But that is not yet the case in digital spaces. And there are some research projects, there are some temporary developments that happen in some institutions, but it's not yet widespread. And this is where you guys come in. So we're going to finish with homework. And homework is those projects, those very projects of providing new means of education and new means of knowledge creation. That's also what you guys are working on for the museum, Fier pour Nous. So we'll have individual sessions during recitation when I'll talk to you about your projects. And you should also come and go through the databases that I've put up online. It's on the first slide. And decide on a database that you might be interested in working with. It doesn't have to be your ultimate decision. A database you would like to work with, and explain why you want to work with this. I will see you all on Wednesday, and I'll see you on YouTube next Monday.